All right, now today we're going to be talking about mixing color, and in particular, talking about how to develop your own color sense, or maybe another way of putting it is how to think outside the box when you're mixing color, or maybe just how not to copy the photograph when you're mixing color. That's a biggie. That seems to be our default. If we're struggling to come up with color that works in our painting, it's just, start copying the photograph. And I've done that many a times. Fortunately, I can stop myself a little bit more often now than I used to. But usually when you're struggling and you can't think of what else to do, the default is just copy the photograph. But as artists, we want to think differently than the camera. We want to be able to look and interpret what we see color-wise. We want to be able to suggest a sunlight or create the illusion of sunlight and depth. So to do that, you have to think through what you're mixing color-wise. In other words, mix colors that work as opposed to just colors that are in the photograph. I mean, once in a while you can have a photograph where the color's pretty good. It works okay, but even then, if you just copy it, it's going to have a dead look to it as opposed to kind of a thought process of color that gives you colors that make your painting work better than the photograph. So all that sounds real confusing, so let me show you what I'm talking about here. I've got a photograph here from Yosemite National Park. Went there a few years ago and did a bunch of little paintings, but I also took about, 700 photographs. So I have a lot of images. And when I go home, I typically look through them and I can crop them, I can zoom in, zoom out. But I also want to think through, how do I want to arrange the shapes? This has definite shapes here, we'll talk about in a second. And then what kind of colors do I want? Well, the color's not too bad here. These tree trunks look burnt. They're just too dark, there's no color in them. But the values aren't quite right. And I don't want to just copy what's there. I want to interpret what's there using colors that I think might give me a little different color harmony. And I do that with smaller paintings, 6 by 8, 8 by 10, and I'll just play around with them and do a whole bunch of them, even for just one photograph, using different colors to try and come up with a different feel color-wise. And sometimes I really push it just so I can get out of a rut sometimes. I will just, make the sky orange instead of blue, make the grass yellow instead of green, just really push it and then try and harmonize it with those colors. So this one here, I like the composition. It's too busy, too many trees. I like the darker, bigger trees here in front, some of the logs on the ground, and then these verticals, picking about maybe half of them or a little more than half of the trees. Then a third of the painting below is in shadow. Strip of sunlight here, and then shadow and sunlight in the trees, and then sky. And those are my big major shapes. But I can rearrange these shapes as much as I want. Now this one has a few aspens here and a lot of pine trees in the background that are sunlit and shadow. So what I'm going to do, and you can see this in the thumbnail drawing, I did a few of these to kind of figure out what I wanted. Here's my vertical pine trees, big vertical trunks. Then I have that little less than third shadow in the foreground, strip of sunlight, and then light and dark shapes, and then shapes of the sky. And that's my simplified composition. Now, I've turned the pine trees into aspens because I can. We're the artist here, so we can do whatever we want. Don't feel tied to the photograph all the time. Now, it helps to have painted a lot of aspens outside and or from photographs. The idea that you have to have painted outside to really be an artist at all, I don't think is really true. I think it really helps. If you really want to learn quickly and develop a really good color sense and how to simplify things, it really helps to paint outside. But I know a lot of artists that don't, and their stuff looks great. So never say never. Never say that you can never paint without painting outside. For those of you who don't or just can't get outside, you can certainly learn to paint. But going outside is a good benefit. So you can see I've got the lightest light here, the aspens, against the darker hills in the background, light sky, light middle ground, dark foreground, and then dark verticals that really break up. These vertical shapes going different directions, having different spacing between them, they really act as kind of abstract shapes that kind of break up the painting. You got this shape, size, and a bigger one, a little smaller, smaller yet. Just all the shapes in between the trees. As long as it works abstractly, I'm happy with it. But I'm not stuck with pine trees in the background or painting in all the trees or even the logs on the ground. I picked out one or two of them and then changed some others where I thought it worked a little better, less busy. But this is my simple thumbnail, and I'm using 3 values: the white of the paper for sky and aspens and ground, and then the dark is the darkest dark is the tree trunks, some of the darks in between the aspens, and then the darks here and some of the darks back there are a little bit lighter. So I have 2 darks and 1 light, the light of the paper, and 2 darks. And this is graphite, probably equivalent to about an 8B. Any kind of B pencil, drawing pencil, probably above 3B, is dark enough to really get these darks in here. It's so much easier to draw with a heavy dark pencil than it is a light hard pencil, or a heavy soft pencil is better to draw with. Then I'm taking a stump, a drawing stump. You can find them in any art store, just stumps for smearing. And I just smear to even out the tone, just so I can read it better. I don't always do that, but I did on this one. Then for a color study, this is what I'm going to use here as my palette. It's cad yellow light, and then I'm splitting the complement. So this is a split complementary. It's cad yellow light, and violet is the complement, or the complements. So if I have violet and yellow, that's my complementary colors, but I'm going to split it. Yellow is going to be the main one, and I'm going to split the violet to go to colors on either side of violet. So the color on the color wheel on either side of violet is red violet, and that's alizarin crimson, and then blue violet. And this is ultramarine blue with a little bit of alizarin crimson in it. It looks very blue, but it's definitely a blue violet. Doesn't read as right on this. So split complementary. It's still some kind of yellow, red, and blue. Most color schemes are. Sometimes you get away from a pure yellow, and you get you get a yellow orange, yellow green to be your yellow, and you get away from a pure red like I did here. And I have red violet, that's alizarin crimson, and then blue with a little bit of crimson to make a bluish violet. Now you can buy blue violet in a tube. Then I just have 3 values of each one. These are small paintings, so I don't have to have a ton of paint, but this kind of gets me along further down the road when I mix up a couple of values. I used to squeeze out all my paint and mix a lighter version of each, and it was just kind of convenient. It's not a necessary thing, but it helps once in a while. I do that when I have a limited palette like this. Sometimes I'll extend it down to even more values. So from the thumbnail drawing, I transfer that to my canvas. It's a small canvas, and I'm using charcoal on the canvas. I don't usually do that. I usually just use a little burnt sienna on a brush to separate things. But you can see I got the shadowed a little less than third down here, strip of sunlight, my vertical tree trunks, which I didn't make dark yet, and then the shadow of the darker mountain behind, and the light aspens and the light sky. So still just 2 values here, really just outline. I don't really have much value at all, but this sets up my simple shapes. Not the simple values. I usually in my drawing just set up big value shapes, but here I did outline because it is a very simple composition. Then I'm starting color-wise, and as I'm looking at my palette, I've decided the background is going to be more of a violet, not blue violet or red violet, or violet. So I'm getting alizarin crimson, the blue violet, and I'm mixing a violet. For the foreground shadow, which has a lot of dead leaves on it and fall leaves, I'm using the yellow and the crimson to mix up an orange. And to make that orange more in the shadow, a little darker, I'll add a little bit of the blue violet. And for some of the greens in there, I'm adding the yellow and the blue violet. That gives me a muted green. And if I need to gray it, I'm going to add a little bit of the red violet to it. So it's a simple thought process because I don't have a lot of colors to pick and choose from. And also not a lot of colors to confuse me. But here I'm mixing up a violet. I probably have a bit of yellow in it because it looks fairly grayed. But hopefully I come back and I clean that up, I think. And I'm just filling in the mountains in the background. And this looks very haphazard, just kind of slapdash. But I am really careful with these shapes of the aspens, shape of the mountains in the background, shape of the tree trunks. It doesn't look like it, but it's not just haphazardly put down. Putting them down fairly careful. Now, not detailed. I'm not putting down any detail. I don't want to do that at all. Any detail at all is going to be the very last thing I add to the paint. Never draw detail in the drawing stage. Always leave it at the very end of the painting process itself. So again, you can see some of the mixing here, kind of red violet to violet, or the red violet and blue violet making a violet. These are some of the colors and values I'm mixing. I haven't done any green yet. I am using white also, but it's just kind of, small painting, so I don't need a lot of space. So here's my orange. This is yellow and a lot of alizarin crimson and a little bit of blue. Gives me that kind of dark reddish orange. Slightly cool because there's the blue violet in it. And then this is the alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue with some yellow in it to mute it slightly. Not much yellow because the yellow is pretty light. I don't want to get it too light. And then again, you can see I'm just filling in big areas. This is the yellow and alizarin crimson. There's the blue violet, a little bit of alizarin crimson. And here, the aspens, which are kind of the focal point, I'm mixing up several variations. I've got probably straight yellow. I've got yellow with a little blue violet right there. Alizarin crimson with a tiny bit of yellow. That's more of a light red. I got more of an orange here with the yellow and alizarin crimson, or the red violet. Another orange, another green. So I've got 3 or 4 different colors. There's just orange over here. And they're all real subtle color changes. They're kind of the same value, not much value change. You can see this is pure yellow here, and yellow with a little bit of crimson, a little more crimson, a lot more crimson than the blue and yellow, a lot more blue to the yellow, or blue violet. And the reason the blue violet makes a difference is it's blue with a little red in it. So when I mix it with yellow to make a green, it's not going to be a bright, intense green. It's going to be slightly muted. So this is slightly muted. It doesn't look it right now, but it's not as bright as it could be. So having a blue violet instead of a blue in my color scheme gives me a muted palette. It's also going to give me a lot more harmony. So again, blue violet and the red violet here with a little bit of yellow. And the light is yellow and red violet with a little bit of blue. Light on the tree trunk. Careful to get the shapes right, even though I'm going outside of the lines here. When you really have to be careful in those shapes, because pretty soon all your trees look like round balls on brown sticks. So really think through the shape, the design of your trees, because that's going to make them work or not work. Now I'm filling in a little more of the background. This is a little on the dark side. I photographed it. Didn't quite get it light enough, but you can see I'm filling in big simple shapes. It's still pretty much just one color for each area. I got a dark, got a little bit of light there, light, dark, and light on tree trunks. Pretty much all light on the trees, a few little darks on the trees, and then the dark background and the light sky. So I'm trying to keep it as simple for as long as possible, because when it's this simple, no detail, I can still go in and change the value and or color of any of these big shapes really easily, because it's just one value, one color, or in this case, 2 values, 2 colors. But this is real easy at this stage to change things. So I'm going to get everything covered, everything relating well to each other before I start doing anything as far as detail or adding small stuff. And detail is just value change, little value changes. Right now, I just have big value changes. And if I can get the right value relationship between the lights and the darks, between the shadow and the sunlight, between the real dark darks and the lighter darks. If they all have the right relationship, nothing is too dark or too light compared to another value, then everything's going to work. Then I can go and start messing it up with detail. And you can see I'm going in and just dragging more color into the aspens. A lot of the difference, I think, is just I photographed these outside. I photographed this inside. So a little bit of a slightly different look, but it's basically same colors. I'm just filling in a little bit more. I'm gradually being a little more careful, thinking about the edges of the aspens against the sky and against the mountain. I'm adding different colors now into the big areas. So looking at the sky, this is white and blue violet, and I scrubbed in some real light red violet around just to break up the blue. In the aspens, I'm still sticking with the strong yellows, yellow orange, yellow green, yellow and red violet. And then same thing with the ground. I got some different color variations going on there, and dragging some colors into the shadows here. Some colors in the tree trunks. I got some green into that red violet, blue violet, yellow darks in there. Some green, some violet, some blue green, some gray. It's just gray color here. Gray being mixing complements. So mixing a violet and yellow and getting a gray, or a blue and an orange. Or in this case, a blue violet and orange would give me a grayish color. Adding the tree trunks and a few details like branches. Tree trunks back in here and branches really just finish it off a little bit more. Here, nothing holding up the foliage. And you can tell I haven't quite overlapped some color yet. So painting past the edges, blending the edges slightly, adding a little more color variation. Some smaller dark accents like these, they really help break up, add some detail to the painting. But I've captured, I think, what the light's doing using a limited palette, again, of blue violet, red violet, and yellow, and mixing all these other colors from those. And it really creates a lot better harmony than having a palette of 15 colors where you have colors that are pulling apart from each other. It doesn't have that same color harmony. But I can still have bright colors, but the bright colors and the more muted colors will harmonize a lot more by using a limited palette. Now I use a full palette most of the time, 12 colors, but I'll do a lot of color studies with this. And if I like this and I want to do a bigger 6x8, so bigger would be 24 by 32 or 24 by 30. So if I could do a 24 by 30 from this, I would block the colors in with the same 3 colors. And then to finish off, I would use some of the other colors that I usually use on my palette. I use the full palette. But pick a color scheme, a color scheme from the color wheel, and start there, get it blocked in, and see how it works. Now, I think I have some other YouTube videos where I talk about picking color schemes, and I'll talk about the different color schemes from simple colors on the color wheel. But let's look real quick before I leave here at some paintings by an artist name of Chauncey Ryder. And he was a painter, 1868 to 1949, mostly on the East Coast. He went to art school in Chicago, Art Institute, and I think over in Paris for a while. But all his paintings have just a unique color quality to them. They're all slightly muted, at least, but there's a lot of color harmony, and there's a lot of color variation. So you got the sky color, the reddish mountain, the bluish mountain, a little bit more in the green. Things getting warmer as they come forward, but a lot of color variation, but a lot of color harmony and really good composition. So the idea behind a good landscape is have a good composition, how you arrange your big, simple shapes, not a ton of shapes, how you arrange your big shapes, get the right values, and then add a little bit of color. And that makes a beautiful painting. So you don't need a ton of color like you can see here. Probably uses black as well, with maybe 2 to 3 colors. And I'm guessing they are limited and very harmonious, which usually points to a more limited palette. He does great trees. Look at the shape of these. Winter tree back in there with just the shape of the bare branches. Nice shape here against the dark green. Just really great paintings to look at to show atmosphere, variety of color. Here are the colors. The background, the sky is more of a, gosh, I don't know, a bluish green or bluish violet. Really blue to violet hills. Gradually getting warmer, violet and orange, and I don't know, maybe black and a little bit of yellow here. I think he did use black, but just nice spots and markings on the painting for the tree shapes there, good values. Just a little bit stronger color. This one, the image is not very good, pixelates too much, but the color, that violet sky, you got a muted violet with this muted yellow. That really pops really well. And then you got violets and greens and oranges down here to pull that forward. And they're simplistic paintings in the sense that they're not overly complicated. That doesn't mean they're easy, but they read better than a lot of paintings because he doesn't try and do too much. Now, my guess, and this is just a guess, you know, you're painting in the 1800s, doing a lot of painting outside, and the paintings you do inside are done from the color sketches and or from drawings. And my guess is he painted, because I find a lot of these drawings of his, I think some of them are lithography drawings done with a grease pencil on a stone that you can press the paper on and pull it off. So they're probably drawings for drawing's sake. But my guess is he did a ton of these drawings to paint from as well. And you could make a painting from this. It has everything in it. Another nice drawing, real dark. Again, probably the grease pencil from the lithography process. But he draws so well, and you can see he does a lot of drawing and probably uses those to do as his thumbnails. Now this is an etching, totally different, but still, just like drawing, it's a dark, light, and then the halftones. It's 3 values. And if you can do a thumbnail drawing that looks like this, you can do a painting from that thumbnail drawing. Even with that palette, the blue, violet, red, violet, and yellow, easily come up with a nice variation of color for this composition because the values are set up, composition is good. Now just add a little color. And that's a good way to think and see color. Think about and see color as well. Here's got a real bluish green sky, a little brighter colors. A gray clouds, and then the orange to red orange muted grass and the dark stuff in here. But great trees. He's a good one to study for trees and composition as well. But do that. Take a lot of references, do a lot of thumbnail drawings where you're thinking through simplifying the shapes, come up with a really good composition. And that's the first step and most important. And then come up with a color scheme and do a bunch of little color studies.